Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Grounded Podcast with Pastor Matt Round. In this episode, we are going to be answering the question, how can I seek the kingdom of God? It's a good question, and here to answer it is Pastor Matt Round. Hello, Pastor Matt.
Hey, Noah. Yeah, it is a good question, and I suppose we need to first kind of define some terms. What does it mean to seek, first of all? It means to pursue something, and what's the kingdom of God? When we think of the kingdom of God, we need to understand that where the king is, his kingdom is, the king being Jesus Christ. And so when we say seek the kingdom of God, we're not only talking about the future kingdom where Christ rules and reigns on the earth. When Jesus, particularly in Matthew 6 in the Sermon on the Mount, said to seek the kingdom of God, he was speaking to those who were still going to have to live their lives in a fallen, temporary, finite world stained by sin. How were they to live as kingdom citizens, even as they hoped for and anticipated their coming king? How would they live now in light of the future reality when they would be present with the king? And I guess to take it back even a step further than that, in order to seek the kingdom, you have to know the king first. So the answer to this question, how do I seek the kingdom of God, has to begin with, do you know the king who is over that kingdom, and really the King of Kings? If you don't have a relationship with Christ, then to pursue religious things, even to pursue Christian things, is ultimately eternally worthless. We can create all kinds of checklists. How do I be a better person? How do I be a better mom, dad, spouse, employee, employer, friend, neighbor? How do I be better at all of these things? And without Christ at the heart of it, without the relationship with Jesus Christ, you cannot seek the kingdom. You cannot do anything of eternal value. Hebrews says that without faith, it is impossible to please God. So I think that's just a very, very basic introductory fact. To seek the kingdom requires that you know the king. And we've talked about that in earlier podcasts, so we'll leave that there. But beyond that, for the believer, the question comes up, how do I seek the kingdom? Because Jesus did call on his disciples to seek the kingdom. In Matthew 6, verse 33, very famous, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided to you. There's a lot in there that kind of demands that we understand a little bit of the context. Jesus is speaking in that particular part of the Sermon on the Mount. He's just corrected the false religious practices of the scribes and the Pharisees, those people who hypocritically practice their religion for the external reasons. He's taught his disciples how to pray. And in Matthew 6:16, he talks about fasting. Not to make a gloomy face like the hypocrites do, not to fast so that others will notice you, but be fasting for the reason that you're trying to please the Father, that you're pursuing the Father. Verse 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And that portion in particular is kind of a key to understanding what Jesus is saying when he says, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. Our world, the world that we live in, the physical, tangible world around us looms very large in our mind. Part of that is out of necessity. If we don't sleep, we get tired. If we don't eat, we get hungry, and eventually we die. If we don't work, we don't earn, and we don't have the money to meet basic needs. So there's a very pressing nature to the reality around us. But more than that, it can overtake us, and it can occupy our thoughts and our minds and our hearts in such a way where our priority, subtly sometimes, but where our priority shifts to this world. To seek the kingdom at its heart means to have a different priority than the world around us. Whether that is pursuing wealth or pursuing security or pursuing happiness or pursuing comfort, for the believer, we are to see ourselves as citizens of the kingdom. When Paul writes to the Philippian church, he reminds them that their citizenship is in heaven. And that was really key for that city, who took great pride in their Roman citizenship. It meant very particular things for the citizens of that city. But the believers there are reminded that whatever your earthly privileges are for wherever you live, this isn't your home. This is your temporary residence. We are sojourners and aliens here on earth. Our citizenship, our final station is in heaven. And so for the believer, to seek the kingdom is really about maintaining a mindset that says every thought, every word, every action, every heart affection, every pursuit ultimately has to have the kingdom as its priority. We could go back to answering the most basic question, what is God's ultimate and final purpose for us as believers? And that is to make us like Christ. Romans 8 says that's what he predestined us for, to be conformed to the image of his Son. Whatever God is doing in your life, he is about making you more like the Son. Ultimately, when we die, that glorification that believers experience is the putting off of sin, the putting off of these temporary, finite, mortal bodies, and being clothed with the eternal, being covered with the righteousness of Christ, being fit to be in God's presence for eternity. It's that completion of that making you like the Son process. This is kind of convoluted, but it all goes back to what does it mean to seek the kingdom? To seek the kingdom means that we have that same priority now. That ultimate priority that is God's priority for us becomes our priority now. So to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness means that in all that we do, we recognize that we are doing these things as it relates to seeking the kingdom. Do we seek the kingdom and then not work at our physical jobs? Do we seek the kingdom and then not put great effort and time into our relationships with our husbands, wives, children, neighbors? Of course not. We still live in this world. The difference is we see it through the filter of seeking the kingdom and all of those things that we do. In other words, when I work, I don't work for the paycheck. I don't work for the promotion. I don't work for the advancement. I don't work for the pride that is given when we are recognized for our good work. When I work as a kingdom citizen. I work to the honor and the glory of God in all that I do, which will mean that I work hard. It will mean that I work diligently. It will mean that I give my best effort. But it will also mean that the work in and of itself is not what fulfills me. It's knowing that even as I do that, I can honor Christ and pursue his kingdom through those things. And we can apply that to everything, raising our kids, loving our spouses, loving our neighbors. And I think it's really important to get this because that verse, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you, comes right in the middle of the specific context of Jesus talking about being anxious. In Matthew 6:25, he says, "For this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life, as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. Is life not more than food, and the body more than clothing?" And he goes on to talk about the birds and the flowers of the field and how God looks after his creation. And if we are not more precious than those things, which his children are infinitely more precious to him than those parts of creation, then of course he will care for us. And so the believer is freed from the anxiety associated with pursuing the things of this world. And I think we miss that sometimes. The idea of how do I seek the kingdom isn't another burden, another layer, another aspect of obedience that I have to force myself to. To seek the kingdom is tremendously freeing. To seek the kingdom in all that I do removes the ultimately misplaced and selfish and prideful responsibility of meeting my own needs, because it's God who meets my needs. It removes the need for self-gratification and self-satisfaction in what I do. It removes the need to find my identity in my employment or in my relationships or in my social media status. And so many times those things are exactly what makes us anxious. I don't have enough money, therefore I am anxious. I am at odds with my spouse or my kids or my neighbors. Therefore, I am anxious. I'm not sure who I am or where I fit into the world. Therefore, I am anxious. The cure for all of those things is not to solidify the circumstances around us to the point where they finally make sense. The solution for all of those things, as Christ defines it, is to pursue the kingdom, because God has given us as believers very particular instructions on what that looks like. How do we then pursue the kingdom? Well, we strive for obedience, and we want to make things complicated. We want to make God's will complicated. And in any given situation, maybe discerning God's will has some question marks attached, but broadly we know what God's will for us is. It's our sanctification. It's our process of becoming more and more like Christ. And so as the believer pursues obedience, as the believer pursues what it will look like to live as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven, even while we are temporary sojourners here on earth, then we are finally freed from the anxieties and the pressures and the disappointments and the heartbreaks that come along with pursuing the things of this world. where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. And that's the tragic irony. The more that we pursue the things of the world, the more tightly we grasp those things that the world says we need to find our security, the more failing and fleeting they wind up being. The harder you try to hold on to money, the more quickly you find that it slips away, the less you find that it's satisfied. The harder you try to write those relationships, to identify yourself by your social media standing or whatever it might be, the easier you see those things slip away and the less secure you become. The more tightly you cling to Christ, the more wholeheartedly you pursue obedience, the more secure you find yourself. What does it look like for a believer to pursue the kingdom of God? It is a day by day, moment by moment, taking every thought captive and asking that foundational question of why do I do what I do? Not do I have to go to work? Not do I have to pay my taxes? Not do I have to eat dinner with my family? But why do I do those things? How am I pursuing Christ even as I pursue those things that Christ has called me to in this world? Sometimes that's in the big, grand moments that kind of define our lives. Most often, it's in the mundane, boring, day-to-day flow of the lives that we live, which, again, means that there are no insignificant parts of our life, that there is great and eternal significance in the fact that we can seek the kingdom as we enter data on a spreadsheet that somebody might or might never see. There's great and eternal significance in the fact that we can pursue the kingdom when we're up at 2 a.m. rocking a sick child. And so the believer not only finds security in their identity with Christ, they find peace and even a great richness in the boring, in the mundane, even in the painful, because in those things, we can pursue what God has called us to. See, God has promised to supply all of our needs. That's key to understanding that passage in Matthew 6. The problem is I don't think of my needs the same way that he does all the time. Sometimes I think my need involves maybe another 0 or 2 on the end of the paycheck. Sometimes I think my need is for the validation or even the affection of the spouse, the coworkers, the friends. Sometimes I think the need is just that one more thing that I can touch, taste, and feel. And God's sovereign plan might reveal that my need for that moment is actually humility or brokenness or the refining and testing of my faith. And as painful as that is, and as much as I wouldn't design it if I was running things, we know that that's what's good. Because again, God's ultimate goal for us is that we look like the Son. For the believer, and whoever you are out there, whatever you're going through, whether it's the minor frustrations that come with day-to-day life, or whether it's the kind of life-defining crisis that you might be walking through, when it comes to seeking the kingdom, while I can't speak specifically to every circumstance because there are just too many, the answer is to seek the kingdom means to pursue Christ-likeness in whatever your situation is. And the wonderful promise that goes along with that is that that is God's business in your particular circumstance as well. And so as you are pursuing the same priority that God is, you can be assured that his will be done in that. Philippians 1, again, the one who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. So there's, again, great security in knowing that you can't fail, because it's God's work to complete that in you. So, Christian, in whatever circumstance you're in, understand that the kingdom, as long as you live, is something that you can strive for. That pursuing Christ-likeness and obedience in whatever situation you're in is the means of seeking the kingdom of God. And we'd love to know how we can pray for you even as you do that. Whatever specific issue you might have, we want to come alongside you. So feel free to email the show, as I know Noah gives you those links at the end of the website. But that's kind of that's the broad brush strokes for what it looks like for a Christian to pursue the kingdom. And more than what it looks like, again, because there's so many details, the why behind it and the purpose and ultimately the security and pleasure that comes from pursuing the kingdom over the things of this world.
Thank you very much, Pastor Matt. If you enjoyed this episode, maybe you can consider checking out our other episode, What is the Meaning of Life for a Christian? It's a really good one. I definitely recommend it. If you want to listen to other episodes in general, go check out our website, thegroundedpodcast.com. Pastor Matt's right. If you have any prayer requests or questions of your own, email us, groundedwithmattround@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.